The sponsor for this episode is Joe Fleming, and he runs a consulting company on his own. So if you're looking for any help with cloud hosting or with any SQL Server tuning, performance, etc., please feel free to reach out to SQL Tailor Consulting. Thank you, Joe, for sponsoring us. So Leslie, you can put the other slide up, right? I didn't have time to make it. The one with her.
Yeah, I'll add that on at the when we do the editing. Yes, yes. So welcome, Cindy. We're so excited to have you here with us today. Yay!
Thank you. I'm excited to be back in the SQL community and talking to SQL family, and I miss you all.
I miss you too. I can't wait to see you at Summit. It's going to be great. So we are talking with the women who are putting on pre-cons at Summit this year, and Cindy has a session. Yours is on Tuesday, right? Is that when yours is? Yes, Tuesday. So y'all go out. If you go into Summit, you should go and check her session out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is you're going to be talking about?
So it's the Race and Gender Equity Toolkit, and I'm going to introduce a series of tools that I use when I do group coaching around the same subject. So it's a set of things that are based on something I call question the narrative, which is as we look at any story that we're telling, why don't we have more women in this particular role? Or why don't we have more women at this level? Or why don't we have more Black women at this level? Why don't we have any Indigenous women? For example, as we talk about those stories, I'm going to introduce a series of tools that we can use to talk about who's centered in the narrative. Are we defending the people who've made the decisions, or are we open to looking at ways we can make the culture more comfortable so that the people that are turning down the jobs we're offering are willing to come into the space, for example, or the people who are already in the organization are willing to stay, even if they don't look like the people who are already in power. So that question the narrative set of tools, that framework will run throughout the entire day. And then I'm also introducing several other concepts, and then you'll have some things that you can take away. And a lot of it's going to be about practicing what we're learning and learning how to do things together, because breaking down that individualism and that I must do this while a bunch of other people go out and do things on their own, that's one of the problems we have to break down and start looking at how we can come together and do things communally so that we are constantly reevaluating and adapting and keeping people in organizations so that everyone can thrive.
Can you tell us a little bit about the types of activities and the things you'll do in your session to facilitate that conversation?
So I'm going to do a lot of practicing. So for example, I'll start with a land acknowledgement. And I want to say that I am a citizen of the Delaware Tribe of Indians and Cherokee Nation. And my tribes, my nations are deeply involved in their local communities. They're deeply involved in the land. There's a land back initiative that's going on in North America and Canada. And that is something that Cherokee Nation in particular has benefited from recently by getting the right for Cherokee citizens to harvest traditional plants off of native forest land. So that is an example of how the movement is actually working and how people's awareness through land acknowledgements can actually further these causes. So for example, I would give the land acknowledgement during the Precon day, and then we would talk about how that is bringing equity and how it can be used if done right, and how it can create harm when done incorrectly. And a lot of land acknowledgements are done very superficially. They're repeating the same thing over and over, and they actually can create more harm. And so then we would talk through that, and then I would have everybody with a handful of tools I would have see if they can come up with their own land acknowledgement and share them within a breakout group and practice that, and then talk about how they could bring that into their own work in a way that feels authentic, and talk about how they figure out how often to do it, how often to change it, how to build on it, what to do with it. So that would be an example of what we're going to do with each of the tools that I'm going to introduce throughout the day. So it's here's a tool, here's some reminders of how to do it, And then we're going to practice it together. And again, we're going to practice in relationship with each other and not in isolation.
So it's fascinating to me that you're talking about the land. We went to Alaska for our 20th anniversary a couple of years ago. We went specifically in the spring because we wanted to be there for the herring spawn. And we talked with some of the locals that were on our ship with us when we were sailing around Sitka Sound about the struggles between the fishing industry and the native peoples. And they talked about how the herring spawn used to go, you know, hundreds of miles down the coast of Alaska into California, and the overfishing and the native way of gathering the spawn by putting the hemlock branches in the water so that when they spawn, it lands on that and brings it up. And it was, as somebody who lives in the desert, that wasn't anything that I had ever considered, ever had any exposure to. The, you know, ongoing legal battles between the fishing industry and the First Nation people to be able to do. And it was really eye-opening to get that perspective and learn the history and see the impact on the world that the white man's way of doing things has versus the very natural and holistic view that the First Nation people have in the world. And I think that being able to bring that perspective into business, right? That's where I was kind of going with this. And knowing that there are people out there whose intentions are to minimally impact the world around them and still be able to survive, and bring that view into IT and into our business processes and be able to incorporate that it's an important view, and it really needs to be talked about more. So I'm glad you're doing this session.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example that you brought forward, because you're talking about how you're adding. You're talking about how you're learning and growing and bringing in new ideas and creating true innovation and true disruption, as opposed to a lot of tech right now is somewhat stagnant. Like, tech loves to disrupt other things, other industries, other people, but the tech industry itself kind of likes to repeat the patterns of the past. And so,
so true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much about, well, we've always done it that way, or we're looking for efficiencies, but only when efficiencies keep the status quo the same.
Yeah. So would you be talking about how companies can diversify their hiring mechanism and actually hire a diverse team, Cindy? Would that be part of what you're going to be teaching?
Yes and no. So I am going to introduce a lot of foundational concepts that can be used for many things. I am a firm believer that you have to have retention before you have hiring. So if we're able to create cultures where people who are not like the current power structure. So when we have more people who aren't cisgender white men, because that's the majority of the people with the majority of the power in tech, when we have those people who come and stay, then we have some proof for the people who are candidates for being hired that, yeah, maybe they might be able to be successful. I can remember doing interviews, and quite often I was the only woman on the loop of people interviewing candidates. And I remember going back to the rest of the group that was interviewing and saying, you know, every woman that comes to this loop asks me, is it possible for a woman to succeed at this company? And everyone else in the room, all men, looked at me and went, I've never once had anybody ask that. It never occurred to me that women would question whether they could be successful here. Why would they ask you that? Like, they were completely puzzled, because the women aren't comfortable asking that question unless there's somebody already there, already in the loop, that they think they're going to get an honest answer from. And I'm willing to bet they would not have asked a lot of women that question either. But I made it very clear when I was the interviewer that I was aware of all of these things that are happening in the industry. All of the white male bars is what I call them, that the proxies that we use, the gates that we use, the way that we screen people out instead of thinking of how we screen them in, that those are things that are white male bars. They, regardless of people's intention, regardless of people's attempt to be fair, we just unthinkingly use these bars or these gates that perpetuate having more people like us. So I'll use those sorts of perspectives to talk about the hiring and the retention, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on things that you can get from a gazillion different training places. I mean, we've been getting training in all my years at Microsoft. The number of times that I went to women in tech events inside Microsoft, that was constantly, they were telling you how to hire more people all the time, and it doesn't work. Telling people that doesn't work. So my approach is different. My approach is, let's look at the foundational reasons, and then you can go back and look at what you're being told and what you're doing with a fresh perspective. And now you can apply it to the gaps in your own department, on your own team. Instead of me telling you, I'm going to open new gates, open new ways of looking at it, of reshaping the bars. And then everybody can decide for themselves what's going to work in their organization for them.
That makes a lot of sense.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the toolkit that you have that you're going to be sharing with everybody?
Sure. So I mentioned land acknowledgements, and that is something that doesn't need to take up a lot of time. It's not something that needs to happen repeatedly, but it is a way of remembering and thinking about people who aren't normally in the room. One of the biggest challenges faced by a lot of Native nations, and one of the main reasons that First Nations people started the tradition of land acknowledgements, is that a lot of people in North America don't realize natives are still here. And the entire system that the United States and Canadian governments imposed on nations are meant to, over time, dilute the power of these nations. So a lot of nations, like Cherokee Nation, says you're either 100% Cherokee or you're 0% Cherokee. I'll instantly, when I tell people I'm Cherokee, people say, what percentage are you? What's your blood quantum? And that is something that is intended to dilute the power of Native people and make people think we're no longer here. And so that's a tool that you can use as a reminder. And then some of the other tools are, for example, gracious space. So gracious space is very much in tune with a lot of indigenous cultures on this continent, in Africa, a lot of older cultures that are more communal and community focused, and work together in ways that modern capitalism tells us is not sustainable. And so gracious space is based on a lot of those principles, and it was created through the Center for Ethical Leadership. And it's a way of thinking about every time you're interacting with other people, you're going to bring certain aspects of kindness and grace and curiosity and openness, and you're going to create a space and a spirit and a setting where you're inviting differences. It used to be called invite the stranger. You're inviting difference and you're learning in public. And so you're deepening the relationship so that you can have conflict, where people in the room are okay being uncomfortable, because in the relationships that have been built in the room, you're able to ask the tough questions. You're able to say, I don't know, that everybody else is agreeing with that, but I'm the 1 out of 50 and I'm saying, I don't know if that quite makes sense. And I think back to right after I got out of college in the early 90s, and my manager was one of the few women that was a manager in the organization I was in. And everybody else was like, we've all been up all night. We're trying to solve this problem, systems down. We don't know what to do. And everybody's like, we've got to go. We've got to order all this hardware. And we've got to do all this stuff. And my manager was like, that's not the problem. And she felt safe enough and kept repeating, no, what we need to do is this. And all of a sudden, all the men started listening to her and go, well, what do you mean? Why do you think that? And she's like, well, look at this graph. Look at this thing here. And then we started all focusing our energy on what she was pointing at, and we resolved the problem. We didn't have to order any hardware. And, that sort of thing is because she felt safe, she felt trusted, she knew she could come forward, and Gracious Space creates those kinds of environments. So we'll practice that throughout the day, and I'll give you some tools that go along with that as well. And then there's also adaptive community leadership. So on Wednesday, I have, I'll do a deeper dive in my main conference session on adaptive leadership. And that's a way of leading where you're focusing on relationships first. You're focusing on the people in the room, and your goal is to change hearts and minds. So most of what we do, whether we're in the technology industry or not, is technical leadership when we're talking about adaptive versus technical. So a technical problem is one where there is some sort of known solution. The details are going to vary, but people know how to launch a new product. They know how to launch a new feature. They know how to deprecate a feature. These are known things. They're not easy, but there's known paths forward. An adaptive challenge would be more, okay, we need to figure out this thing. There's nobody who can authoritatively say we must go a certain direction. Everybody's not in agreement on what needs to be done. So I'm going to talk about adaptive leadership as well.
Interesting, adaptive leadership. I really like
Those both sound like great topics.
Right. So would there be material accompanying this, Cindy? Like, would you have handouts and something people can take home with the list, with the summary of what you're going to be teaching?
Yeah, so I'll have documents for each of these things, and I'll have them available online. And because we are taking for the pre-cons both in person and online.
Right.
Yeah. So they'll have a handful of things that can be used as references going forward. And also the imagery that I use in all of my coaching and consulting work, which is dragons. So I have a dragon that I tell people to.
I love that. I love the dragon.
Yeah, and I've been using this for quite a while. So I'll see people I haven't seen in years since before COVID who come up to me and say, I still have your dragon. I have little smaller ones, but basically what I tell people is when you're stuck somewhere, you're stuck with, I can't figure out why this is going on. You can literally change the way you're thinking about it by saying, okay, I'm stuck. What are my other options? And pick it up and move another direction. And like your brain will shift in a way where you're like, okay, what are the other perspectives? What are my other options? Where am I stuck in things must be a certain way? And then I go back to the question, the narrative framework. In that case, you can ask who's centered, what are the power dynamics? What are the additional truths? And then retell the story to yourself. So wherever you're stuck, wherever you're having roadblocks, you can think about, well, what if I center a different person or a different department or a different team? What if I think about the power dynamics differently? What if I think about, well, this is true, what else is true? So apply the 5 whys concept to, well, we're only hiring cisgender white men into this role because they have the most experience, because they're the only ones applying. Okay, well, what else? And well, when I look at the job description, it uses terms like rock star. And we've known for 10 plus years that as soon as you put words like rock star or dominate into the job description, the percentage of people who are not cisgender white men drops drastically. So you keep asking those questions. Well, why? And so you look for those additional truths, and then you go back and tell the story in different ways, and you keep using that tool. And so that's why the question, the narrative runs through all of the other tools. But yes, there will be online documents to back up all the things that I will be offering.
It's hard to tell, but this picture behind me is the dragon laying in the dragon nip. And he's all like passed out in the dragon nip.
Excellent. And I like the power symbol of the dragon. So people think of dragons traditionally as something big and scary. You think of the white guy in shining armor on the white horse going to fight the scary dragon, who has supposedly drug off all the young girls. You think about the Game of Thrones dragons that just come along and breathe fire, and thousands of people are destroyed. And I grew up reading The Dragons of Pern, where the humans partnered with the dragons.
And we had to destroy the thread. I mean, you can't
Right.
let the thread land.
Right, right. So they were going after an inanimate object, not against other creatures or humans. And so they came together as a community. And so I think about pivoting from that common public culture or narrative around something that's scary and saying, let's take that scary thing and think about the power in myself. So if I'm afraid of creating change, I'm afraid if we invite Black women into this space that we might have to think about, well, wait, what if we have to change this fundamental thing we've always done as a team? And that is a lot of what I hear when people let their guard down, is like they're superficially okay with bringing others, people who don't look like them, into the space, but they're worried, am I going to get in trouble if I say something wrong and then I'm going to get fired? You know, and those are the sorts of things that Gracious Space can help create an atmosphere where you can say an occasional bad thing, as long as you turn around and say, okay, I am going to take on the learning to deal with that so I don't do it again. And I'm not going to push back and put the burden of proving that something bad happened on the person who's already marginalized and already has less power in the system as it exists. And a lot of that can be wrapped up in thinking of the dragons. And instead of thinking of scary dragons, how can I take this thing that's currently scary and make it friendly, make it a dragon of Pern instead of a dragon of European mythology?
Westeros. We don't like Westeros dragons.
Right.
Well, was there anything else you wanted to share with our audience on your session and why they should come? And
so I do want to say that I am approaching this as a combination of a workshop and group coaching. So that is something that I think is a little bit different than what a lot of people are used to in the tech world. In my 25 years in tech, when I went to training, it was usually somebody at the front of the room saying, do a list of things. Here's a checklist, and when you're done, and then you get to the end of the class, and sure, you'd have a checklist, but you wouldn't have fundamentally changed. You wouldn't have had a change of heart and mind. And that's where adaptive leadership, the type of coaching I do, is very tied to adaptive leadership, where it is about changing people's hearts. It's about changing the way that we feel when we're in various situations, and it's about focusing on relationships. So during the day, we will be doing things that may feel a little odd because they are more coaching focused and they're more group community focused in how we work together. It's not just about your learning as an individual, it's about working together. And I'm going to ask everyone in the room or online or in person to find at least one accountability buddy and make a commitment to meet with them after the session is over, because that is a way to further the learning, keep it going, make a commitment to each other, and agree that you're going to meet again several times and talk about what worked, what didn't work, where the gaps are, how you can fill those gaps, and really think about not the literal or the technical or the technological answer to things, but why am I resisting that? Why would I get uncomfortable with this concept that we're talking about? Do I change the subject? Think about it at that level before we think about, well, how do I literally move forward? How do I talk to HR? How do I write the job description? First address, why am I uncomfortable with writing the job description? Why am I not paying attention to the hundreds and thousands of people out there that can tell you how to write a job description so that it attracts more people who don't look like the people already in power? Like, that information's there. This isn't something you need to come and be taught. Why do you keep coming to these things expecting to be taught what you've already been taught?
Mm-hmm. Very true.
So, and I do want to say that I am really looking forward to seeing people I haven't seen in a long time. So I was looking through the speaker list, and just seeing, you know, Heidi Hastings and Josephine Bush and Pamela Hood and Patrick LeBlanc and, you know,
I know,
Bob
it's so
Ward.
exciting.
I'm so happy for you. Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, so all of these people, and I still remember the very first time I spoke at PASS, it might have been 2005-ish, I'm not sure exactly. Bob Ward kept popping into my room as I was getting ready, and I was like, Bob, you're making me too nervous. You have to leave the room right now. And he's like, I just want to make sure everything's okay. I said, I can't do the presentation, which is weird now because, like, whatever, I don't care. But it was my first really big presentation. And so
Well, I'm sure if Bob walks into my room, I'd be nervous.
right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it can be a little intimidating, but he meant to help. And then so he stayed out, and the very first
He's
thing I did-
really, really sweet. He's among the nicest people. Yeah.
yeah, he is very nice, and he, you know, he did what I said. And then as soon as I started doing the presentation, my PowerPoint froze, and I'm like, oh, if only Bob was in here, he could have fixed. I could have kept talking and tried to fix the presentation, but I had to keep talking and try to fix it because I'd made Bob leave the room. So I need, you know, that's a great example of opening yourself up to community and accepting help and asking for help when you need it, which is a way to break down white supremacy and patriarchy.
Well, thanks so much. I hope you get a lot of people at your session. It sounds like a great time, and I'll come by and pop in the room and say hi. Wave at you.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing everyone. I'd love to see a lot of signups, and I'm gonna make sure that we have posted before the session and after as well a lot of my favorite learning tools. So there's the Seeing White podcast, there's the 1619 podcast. There's Oh Witch Please, which is a very interesting take on learning about white supremacy and patriarchy. So it uses the Harry Potter books as examples. And you know, there's all sorts of learning tools that are out there. So I'll make sure that's available to everyone, and we'll refer to some of those during the Precon as well. So thank you for having me here today. And I hope everybody signs up and comes to the session. It's a very affordable day. And if you can't make it in person, there's an online option, and you don't have to be a tech person to sign up. Everybody's welcome to sign up. And I also offer group coaching as a follow-on to deepen the learning, where we go into the news stories of the week and apply all these tools I'm talking about in ways that let everybody practice and overcome their resistance in a safe place, where you can really say, well, I don't understand. And especially at the beginning of these group coaching sessions, people will say things that a couple months into it, they'll be like, I can't believe I said that thing, and I said it in front of other people. But that's okay, as long as you learn from it and move on, and keep saying thank you when somebody calls out the racism in your teeth, which thank you to Jay Smooth for that great analogy.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.